Hello, welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to be taking a look at the English Language A-Level Paper 4, May-June 2020, Variant 4.2. Okay, so in this paper, here there are 3 questions and you must answer 2 of the 3 questions. So you choose whichever 2. There's no question that you're absolutely forced to answer. It's up to you. Okay, and here there are additional instructions such as following the instructions that are given and asking for paper if you need to, and of course the generic reminder for your need of good English and clear presentation to get all the marks that you possibly can. For this paper, there's a total of 50 marks, and all of the questions are worth equal marks, which means since you're answering 2 questions, both questions are worth 25 marks. Okay, let's get started. So our first question is in regards to spoken language and social groups. Okay, and the following text is a transcription of part of a 2017 interview of an American radio program called The Bird Show. Kristen Klingshirn, the show's presenter, is interviewing the British musician Ed Sheeran. Discuss ways in which the speakers are using language here to communicate and how their language is affected by the context. You should refer to specific detail from the transcription relating your observations to the ideas of your wider study. Okay, so we will start by reading the transcription, and then after I will take you through the notes that I've made regarding the language that is being used by both of the speakers, as well as how the language is affected by the context. Okay, so here we go. Now, as you were putting your new album, Divide, together, was there any songs you came across that drove you crazy? Do you ever give up on anything, or do you see it all the way through? No. I mean, like Shape of You probably has like 100+ mixes on it, so like after like mix 3 or 4, I was like to the label, you just do your thing on it, because like, you know, when it's just too many cooks and everyone has an opinion, so I just let them all have their opinions, and then at the end I just kind of swept in and changed everything. How many people are you willing to let listen to some of your songs before they go public? Oh, whoever, yeah. I'm not that fussy. Yeah, whoever wants to hear them, really, as long as they don't record them on their phone, keep them. Yeah, as long as they don't release them to the world before you're ready. And I'm not going to ask you to pick a favorite song that you've written or favorite song that you perform, because I don't think that's fair. But I would like to know if there is one particular lyric that when you wrote down, you're like, man, that's good. Like, do you have a favorite just lyric that has resonated with you the most? I don't know, probably, because I know you've written a lot. Yeah, probably, I mean, probably something that's like in like the A Team, I guess, or I don't know, or like on the new album, the first track is called Eraser, and the first 2 lines are, I was born inside a small town and I lost that state of mind. I learned to sing inside the Lord's house but stopped at the age of 9. I quite like, that was like a kind of, the whole of that song was a kind of verbal vomit, and those 2 lines sort of opened up the door. Yeah, it was good. Okay, so I hope that you were able to follow me, because I was trying to give you a gist of what the conversation would sound like, actually. So I hope you were able to follow me, but essentially what's happening here, we have Kirsten, who's the interviewer, and Ed, who's the interviewee, and they're talking about his album, and the name of the album is Divide. And the first thing that she's asking him is if there's any songs that just drove him crazy. So I believe that he had a hard time with. And he explained that he lets the people at his label just do whatever they want to his songs. And then after, when they're done doing whatever they want, he can go in and change everything, right? Because he talks about when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, basically when there's too many opinions at once, it just ruins. When too many people work on something at once, it ruins the work. It gets complicated. And then that's when Kirsten goes on to ask how many people Ed is willing to allow to listen to his songs before they go public. And he says he doesn't mind as long as people don't just record the songs on their personal phones, because there's a chance that they might be leaked before the label releases the songs, right? And then Kirsten goes on to ask him if he has a favorite lyric, and then Ed says that essentially, yes, his favorite lyric is, I was born inside a small town and I lost that state of mind. I learned to sing inside the Lord's house but stopped at the age of 9. Okay, so that's his favorite lyric from a song called The A-Team. Okay, so now let's talk about the way that the language is used, and as well as how the language is affected by the context. Okay, so I believe the first thing that I would do in the exam is I would say, okay, first of all, what is the context? So here we're given the context. It is 2017, okay, and there's a radio show. So you have a radio show, and the host or the interviewer, presenter, is Kirsten, and the celebrity musician who is the guest on the show is Ed Sheeran for this interview. So we're doing a radio interview, okay? And radio interview means that there's probably listeners on the other side. So the public is not, the listeners, the audience is not right in front of Ed and Kristen, but they are listening from wherever, their house or their car, right? So there's no live audience, so that we know. Important for the context, right? Because sometimes during a live audience, maybe people get nervous. It's maybe for musicians, they go through classes on how to handle nerves, but maybe some musicians are actually, or celebrities are pretty shy naturally in nature, so being in front of a lot of people might be a little bit awkward. Okay, maybe not so much musicians who perform in front of hundreds of thousands of people, but actors, it's a different thing. But anyway, so in this context, what's important is that no live audience, okay? So you're in a smaller setting, so that already should make you more comfortable, in my opinion. What else about the context? The context is we have a celebrity and then an interviewer. So talking about nerves again, imagine that you had to interview your favorite actor or your favorite musician, or you had to interview the president or someone who has a higher status than you, then you might also be intimidated by their presence, okay? So let's take that into consideration when we analyze Kirsten's language, because even though this is her job and she's a professional and she's at work, personally, even no matter what you do in life, no matter what your job is, you're also a human being at the end of the day. So if personally, when she's at home, she really likes Ed's music and she looks up to him, we never know. It could also make her nervous to be in his presence, okay? Despite her being at work. So now that we have the context down, let's take a closer look at the language. First thing that I noticed is that Kirsten uses fillers. So filler words, she says and micropauses. Okay, so already there I see signs of, I have my word here. What is the term exactly? Yes, non-fluency. Had a brain fart there. So that's a sign of non-fluency. The speech is not perfectly flowing. Okay, so she uses a filler word and she also has micropauses. Okay, and here you see she says, was there any songs that you came across that drove you crazy? Do you ever give up on anything, or do you see it all the way through? So there's two questions here. Okay, and usually for interviews, I would say ask one question, but here we see that there's two questions that were asked. Okay. On Ed's side as well, we have filler words, and he uses like a lot. Okay, I counted here in this response here 6 times that he used like. So he uses like a lot of filler words. He also uses micropauses as well. And if we relate, so wait, let me just keep going here. So you can see micropauses. This is Ed, Kirsten, Michael, micropauses again. Kristen, micropauses, filler words. So both of them use filler words and micropauses. Okay, but then let's go back to the context for a minute. I believe that since this is an interview, it is not, I don't believe that we're in the context of a strict, hardcore, very premeditated questions, right? So Kristen here, I think that she's just flowing with the conversation and she's asking questions as she goes, which is why there's the presence of micropauses and filler words. Okay, so the questions are not, I would say that she might have some sort of template, but she isn't in her head. She isn't thinking, I'm going to ask this first and then I'll ask this question. She's asking the questions as the conversation is evolving. Okay, so a lot of this, the correct term is it's improvised. So improvised interviewing. So she's just going with, trying to go with the flow, and she's trying to make conversation and base the questions or the follow-ups that she will bring forth on what Ed Sheeran is giving her to work with. Okay, so that is my explanation based on the context of why Kristen is using the filler words and the micropauses, is because she's coming up with stuff as the conversation evolves. On Ed's end, I believe that his reason for the micropauses as well as the filler words, it may, I wouldn't say it has anything to do with his nature. We never know. You can't say that, right? Because we don't know him personally. But you can tell that this is not, I can tell that he is not fully comfortable. And there's some sort of pressure there. And I believe that celebrities often, when you watch interviews, again, going back to context, this interview is about him. He is the guest. The information that the interviewer as well as the people listening are waiting for is information about Ed. So there is that pressure, and there is that sort of responsibility on his end to provide information and insight on, in this case, in this context, his album, right? Does it say? Yes, on his album and his life, on him, right? It's about him. So here, the filler words as well as the micropauses, he's thinking of what to say. Okay, and you can also argue that he probably doesn't know everything that she's gonna ask, right? So it's not like she sent him the night before, hey, I'm going to ask you this, and then after I'll ask you that. It's probably more in what happened, is that Kristen's show, okay, so the Burt show, whoever is responsible, the producers probably told Ed, okay, when you come here, we are going to ask you a few questions about your album and the process that you go through to write your songs or whatever, right? So they probably, again, a template. They give him an idea of what is going to be discussed, but they don't give him exactly the questions that are going to be asked, right? So that's why sometimes if you think about it in other interviews, it's good to know the context of interviews, right? Because you have to think in terms of context when you answer these questions. But usually in interviews, you'll see some celebrities, they'll get mad during interviews, right? Because they'll be like, hey, I didn't come here to talk about this, or we never agreed that I would ever talk about this subject, okay? So anyway, he can get caught off guard, which is what happened, I believe, over here. Okay, so Kristen asked Ed if he has a particular lyric that he likes, and here again, filler word, he says, and then he says, I don't know, probably, he's thinking. There's a 3-second pause as well. So usually up here we saw micro pauses at the beginning, and there's a full-on 3-second pause there because he was probably caught off guard by the question. It's an unexpected question. Okay, again, going back to the idea that they don't send him a list of possible questions that they're going to ask. So this is an improvised interview. It's just very conversational, and the questions that are coming up are just popping out of nowhere. Okay, so that's the comments that I have regarding non-fluency. No, I have another one about non-fluency. We have stuttering. Okay, so Kristen, she says, and I'm, so there's a stutter there. We also have Ed, who stutters. I didn't write it down. Let me see. He stutters as well. Changed everything. Sorry, I thought I had this down. Oh yeah, there you go. Okay, sorry, right here. Just forgot to. Okay, we have a stutter on his end as well. I'm not that fussy. So again, non-fluency. Okay, so if you should retain anything that I've said in the past few minutes, it's really, there's a lot of non-fluency going on here. Okay, a lot of non-fluency. So the conversation is actually not flowing super smoothly. Okay, and another thing that I've noticed about language is when Ed says, when it's just too many cooks, and everyone, okay, again here stuttering, everyone has an opinion, so I just let them all have their opinions, and then at the end I just kind of swept in and changed everything. Excuse me. Okay, so when he says, when it's just too many cooks, that is actually an anapodoton. Okay, so that's how you pronounce that, anapodoton. So an anapodoton is when you have an idiom, or not necessarily an idiom, but an anapodoton is when you don't finish an expression. You just say half of something. And in most cases, when you don't finish your expression, it's usually because the part that you do include, you believe that people are going to know exactly where you're going, right? So for example, this is a very popular colloquialism, idiom, right? An idiom in the English language when it's just too many, when I think the actual one is too many cooks in the kitchen spoils the broth, or something like that. There's various ways of saying it. So usually too many cooks in the kitchen kills the broth, or something like that, right? But you've maybe heard that before. I have. Okay, so when someone says this, when there's too many cooks, I already know where they're going. When there's too many cooks, it's just no good. Okay, so he didn't even have to finish this train of thought. Just using partial of it is enough to stand alone. And he's also assuming that Kristen is aware of what he means. Okay, which I would argue that they pretty much understand each other as far as language goes. Okay. So yes, we have the anaparotin. Another example of maybe a more generic one would be, there's a saying that is, when it rains, it pours, right? When it rains, it pours. So if you're having a bad morning, the day's probably going to be bad, because if something starts bad, then there's just more bad things that end up happening. So if I say to you, when it rains, you're probably going to understand that I'm implying when it rains, it pours. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when there's an anaparotin, and it is a figure of speech. Okay. We also have lack of back channel, and I saw one instance of back channel in this extract. Maybe somewhere down the line in the rest of their conversation, there's more back channel. But here I see that when they speak, there's not really any. It's very strong on here I wrote it down. The conversation is very structured in terms of turn taking of the adjacency pairs. Okay, so here Kristen will say one thing, Ed will say another thing. Kristen will say one thing, and then Ed will continue. They don't really, there's no really or I know what you mean, or there's a lack of back channeling. Okay, just like in this example here, I wrote it down, there's a lack of back channel because Ed is talking about when there's too many cooks, so when too many people are working on the same thing at the same time, it's not good. And then instead of following or confirming that she agrees with his opinion or anything of that sort, Kristen directly went into another question. So how many are you willing to let listen to some of your songs? Okay, how many people? Sorry. So there's no follow-up there. Okay, and support with what he was saying here. Okay, but then here there is, when Ed Sheeran says, when Kristen asks, how many people are you willing to let listen? Then Ed goes, oh, whoever, and she goes, yeah. So here there's something. She's listening, she's interacting there with him. Okay. We also have, going back to non-fluency, we have false start and reformulation. Okay, so Ed here, he says, when he's talking about letting anybody listen to his songs before it goes public, he says, whoever, I'm not fussy, whoever's like, whoever wants to hear them really. Okay, so whoever's like, whoever wants. So whoever's like, whoever wants, he changed he reformulated his statement there. Okay, so there's a false start because he's starting a statement. Whoever's like stops, whoever wants to hear them really. Okay, so false start and reformulation here. That's another feature of non-fluency. And then as long as they don't record them on their phone, Kristen goes into keep them. So here we have cooperative overlap and active listening. Okay, back channel is also a feature of active listening. Okay, cooperative overlap here. There's no interruption, right? We don't see any interruption symbol, but here Ed Sheeran is saying, I can allow anyone to listen to my songs before they go public as long as they don't record them on their phone. And then Kristen replies with, yeah, keep them. Yeah, as long as they don't release them to the world. So she's adding on to what he's saying, but she's not adding on, but she's adding on, releasing them to the world. She's adding on, and she's giving up a follow-up feedback to what he just said, right? So here we have some cooperative speech happening. Okay. And we also have, so Kristen, again, non-fluency, the stuttering that I have here. Yeah, too far. The stuttering that I have here is from Ed. Stuttering that I have here is from Kristen. I think we went through this already. We did go through this. Okay, so non-fluency, it's a big thing happening in this conversation, probably in my speech right now as well. Okay, I'm having a hard time translating my train of thoughts. Okay, so moving on, here we have a tautology. Okay, so tautology here, it's T as in Thomas, A-U, T as in Thomas, O-L-O-G-Y, tautology. Okay, this is not an O, it's an A, and then a U. So we have a tautology. And a tautology is when you repeat the same thing but in different ways. So it's the same idea, but you just use different words. Okay, so here we have Kristen who's speaking, and she says, I'm not going to ask you to pick a favorite song that you've written or favorite song that you perform, because I don't think that's fair. But I would like to know if there is one particular lyric that when you wrote down, you're like, man, that's good. Okay, so basically here she's asking for his favorite lyric. And then she says, like, do you have a favorite just lyric that has resonated with you the most? Continues here, but here you can just quote this part here, right? She says, sorry, lost myself. She says, when you wrote down, you're like, man, that's good. So yeah, what's your favorite lyric? And then again, she explicitly says, what's your favorite lyric? Okay, so that definitely is a tautology here. And I guess it's not too bad, but again, non-fluency, because it's redundant, right? She could have just said, what's your favorite lyric? Okay. We also have interruption. Okay, we see interruption. Here, Ed interrupted. In this part here, Kristen wasn't done expressing herself, asking her question, and Ed interrupted with, so he's thinking, right, about what he's going to say. And then she finishes, has resonated with you the most. Okay, there's no interruption here between these two. So then Ed starts, he says, I don't know, probably are, and then you have an interruption from Kristen. Okay, so there's interruptions on both parts. Okay, and I don't think that they are malicious interruption to be rude, but they are interrupting one another. Okay, and if we think about the context, something that you can say that I wrote here is technically Ed has higher status than Kristen, right? Ed is a celebrity and Kristen is an interviewer. She's a radio personality, okay? However, they're equal in terms of a conversation, right? Because they feel comfortable interrupting themselves, right? When they're talking, there's interruption there. So it shows that they're comfortable enough to interrupt each other. Because, I mean, if I was interviewing the president, or if I'm talking to maybe a boss at work, you don't interrupt, right? Usually if you feel like someone has higher status, and you never, it's considered rude to interrupt, right? But in this case, in this context, they're very interactive with one another. So there's some interruption going. Okay. So yes, this is what I found, the false start. Again, right, remember here from Ed again. So there's false start from Ed over here. And there's false start reformulation from Ed again. That was like kind of the whole of that song was, right? So here we have specifically, if I hide this, yeah, specifically here and here, we have a reformulation happening. Okay, and what else could be said? So non-fluency, micropause on both sides. Higher status, the conversation is structured. There's turn taking, okay. Agency pairs. Conversation is informative, okay. So the context again, the goal is for Ed Sheeran to dominate the conversation because people are here, he's the guest, people want to hear him speak more than they hear Kristen speak, okay. And the conversation here, the tone it's a positive one. Here I don't see there's no hostile speech. They're both trying to work with each other in a positive way, and they're both trying to give information to the listeners as well, right? So this is a pretty positive discussion that's going on here, okay. So these are the notes that I've made regarding to question 1, if you were to choose to answer this question. And here I just wrote down brief notes, right? Next time I will actually, in the next video that I do for paper 4, I will write an explicit example of how my final answer would look like, because I know that here explaining things to you, it gets a little bit messy, and I may seem disorganized, okay? So sometimes it's hard for me to fully express myself. I'm trying to transfer the knowledge to you in the best way that I can. But next time I think that I will definitely write something just to give you an idea of what my final answer would look like. Okay? Let's move on to question number 2. Okay. English as a global language. The following text is taken from a 27 article which was published online in the University of Maryland student newspaper. Discuss what you feel are the most important issue raised here relating to the changing use of English as a global language. You should refer to specific details from the text as well as to ideas and examples from your wider study. The English language plays a role in dividing cultures is the title. Okay, so here instructions are very clear. Before we take a look into these 2 components, let's read the text together. Okay. So again, the English language plays a role in dividing cultures. Last summer, my family went back to the Philippines after 8 years away. My cousins, my absolute best friends when I was younger, continuously pointed out the stark differences that being Americanized afforded me, especially noting my visible affinity for speaking English to them rather than Tagalog. Speaking English changed from being a communal joke to creating a divide in my family because I could speak it. Not knowing the English language can create massive chasms among groups. Because it is the primary language of academia, as well as a requirement for many universities and businesses, English is an inherent privilege, and not speaking it would be a major demerit, writes blogger Robert Nielsen. This creates a divide between those who are by chance or by wealth and time privileged enough to learn English and those who are simply unable to. Nielsen further explains that expecting everyone to speak English enforces barriers to 3/4 of the world. While having English as the universal language seems to be the easiest way to promote communication between groups of people that would otherwise not be connected, it isn't to those who feel pressured to spend an extreme amount of time, money, and effort to learn the naturally complicated language. It may seem convenient, but only to those of us who are lucky enough to either have parents who pass down the language or put us in an environment conducive to learning it. Instead of promoting English as the primary language worldwide, people should promote the use of other languages. Nielsen suggests science journals can accept other languages with or without translation, and business conferences need not be in English. Okay, fix my camera. My vacation back in the Philippines was the trip of a lifetime. The best moments coming from the conversations I had in Tagalog and laughing with my cousins at my awkward and incorrect grammar. My effort was well returned. At the end of the trip, they learned as much from me as I did from them. Language communication throughout the world needs to be just that, a cultural exchange, not a divisive privilege. Okay? Pretty good text. Very enlightening. Okay? So discuss what are the most important issues raised here relating to the changing use of English as a global language. So I've underlined that in green. All right. So here we have the writer who starts off by saying that last summer he went to the Philippines, okay, after being away for 8 years. And the first thing that his family did was to notice and to point out the fact that they feel as if he's Americanized, okay? And because he actually learned how to speak English while he was away for 8 years, okay? And he says that when he was in the Philippines, he struggled with English just like his family struggled with English. So usually when everyone struggles at the same thing, it's a communal joke, right? So essentially, as an example, imagine that you and I both really suck at math. Then we both suck at math, so we can sit down together and laugh and say, haha, yeah, math doesn't make sense, it sucks, we don't understand math. But then imagine if you get good at math and I'm still not good at math, then I'm going to be pretty much annoyed, and I'll be like, what? Like, now we used to joke about math and now you're actually good at math. So, you know, it may be a little bit of jealousy there, but now I'll be like, wow, like, how dare you, you know, just ditch me. We were both suffering together, and now you're not suffering with me anymore, right? So it creates a divide because you and I both can no longer make fun of math together because now you actually understand and do well with math, right? So this is what's happening here. English changed from being a communal joke to creating a divide in the family because I could speak it. Okay? So, issues raised relating to the changing use of English. It creates a divide. Okay? Sometimes. There's a language barrier, right? That's the divide. Okay? And here in the second paragraph, the author does mention that it is true that English is the primary language of academia, and it is a requirement for many universities and businesses, all right, which is essentially kind of why you're probably taking Cambridge English exams, right? Because you would need a certain mark to be qualified to maybe go to the university, college that you want to go to, okay? And here another point that the author makes is English is an inherent privilege and not speaking it would be major demerit, right? So it is true, since technically it's the primary language of academia, if you don't speak the language, then it really limits you in terms of what you can do as far as studies, right? If most of the books are written or most of the educational articles, videos, content is in English and you don't understand it, it does definitely puts a limit on how far you can go with education. Okay, so this creates a divide between those who are by chance or by wealth privileged enough to learn English and those who are simply unable to. Okay, so here I think one of the major issues is by chance or by wealth, because if you are born in a country where the primary language, official language is English, then that's somewhat chance because you're just born in a family of native English speakers, or even if your parents are not native English speakers, you end up being born in a family that lives in an environment that is English, then that's just chance because you don't choose where you're born, right? And there's that situation, and there's also the situation of people who are not born in families who are native English speakers or who are in an environment that can provide that opportunity for them to speak English, right? But they have money. So if you're in a country you're in a country that does not speak, people don't speak English, and your parents are rich, they can simply just send you abroad to study, and you will learn with time the language, right? And there's people who don't fall under either of these categories, and that's where the privilege is lost, right? So there you go. There's a divide between those who are privileged enough to learn English and those who are not. Okay, and another thing that is mentioned is expecting everyone to speak English enforces barriers to 3/4 of the world. Okay, so interesting is if we look at population, the amount of people who actually speak English are a minority. So it's very interesting. So English is not the most popular language out there. It isn't. I think by default, I think it would be Mandarin, the language, because the Chinese population is super, super high. So I think that by default Mandarin would be the language that is mostly spoken in the world. I'm not too sure on that one. I'd have to check. But this statement here lets us know that English is the primary language of academia. However, 3/4 of the world does not speak English. So it's the minority. So a small group of people are controlling this massive universe, right? So interesting. So that's another issue. So the dominant language as far as education is not the most spoken one. Okay? Next issue that was raised in the article: it isn't those who feel pressured to spend an extreme amount of time, money, and effort to learn the naturally complicated language. So here, I think I didn't read much. Let's go back. While having English, would be otherwise. It isn't to those. Okay. Okay. So this one is a little bit interesting. So this fact here is saying that having English as a universal language seems to be the easiest way to promote communication between groups. So it's easy to say that everyone should speak English when you already speak English, right? So think about your native language. It's your native language. You're comfortable with it. You've been speaking it since you were probably 1-2 years old. So of course, for you, it's easy. So if I told you, should we make the whole world learn your native language, you would probably say, yeah, why not? It's not bad because you're so comfortable with it. So here, that's the point that the writer is making, is when people say that English should be a universal language, it's easy for them to say that because they already speak English. But for the people who feel pressure to spend so much time, money, and effort to learn the language, it's a different story, because learning a language takes time. It takes time, it takes effort, and it also takes money, because usually, unless you live in a country where most of the stuff, most of the communication, or when you're driving, the billboards and everything that you see is in English, you actually have to pay money for someone to teach you the language, right? So it's not as easy to learn English as some people think it is. And some people might even say, well, just go on YouTube and try to learn the English language, but it's not that easy as well. Not everyone in the world has a solid and stable internet connection, right? So it takes money to go on YouTube because you need to pay for internet. Okay. Another issue that is raised is only to those of us who are lucky enough to, yes, it may seem convenient, but only to those of us who are lucky enough to either have parents who pass down the language or put us in an environment conducive to learning it. Okay, so I talked about that already. So you either have parents who teach you the English language, or you're in a country where you go to school in English, or where when you go to the restaurant, they serve you in English. But if you don't, it's complicated. Okay? And here another issue that was raised is when the author says, my effort was well returned. At the end of the trip, they learned as much from me as I did from them. Language communication throughout the world needs to be just that, a cultural exchange, not a divisive privilege. Okay? So here, the issue again, this goes back to the fact that universities, when you're in the academia world, the English language is dominant. Okay, but the writer is arguing that language should be a cultural exchange, and it shouldn't be determinant of someone's education or future or opportunity that they receive in the world. Okay? So all of these are the important issues that I believe were raised in the article. And here it also mentions the instructions also let us know that we can use ideas and examples from wider studies. And here are the things, 3 points that I was able to think about on the spot from just general knowledge. Okay? And here the article talks about learning English but not maintaining the language. Okay? So it's one thing to actually learn English, but maintaining the language is a whole other different ballgame. Okay? So for example, with me, English is actually not my native language. My native language is French. So I can speak English and I can speak French, but if I spend the whole day speaking French, then sometimes when I switch back to English, I have a harder time finding my words. Okay? But if I spend the whole day or whole week mostly speaking in English, then when I switch back to French, sometimes my pronunciation is off, or it gets difficult to juggle so many languages. Okay, it's good for your brain to have different languages. It helps with memory and stuff, but maintaining it's difficult to juggle and to find the right balance. Okay, so learning English is one thing, but even if you pay someone to teach you a foreign language, okay, so think about where you are right now. If you pay someone to teach you a different language and you're in a country where nobody really speaks that language, then when they're done teaching you and you know how to speak it, you're going to have to make the effort to watch TV or to listen to music in that language or to find friends on the internet to chat with, and you need to maintain it, because if you don't use it, you're eventually going to slowly forget it. Okay? So that's a problem that the article, I don't believe, mentioned. So the age of the person learning the language matters. Okay? So the younger you are, for me, for example, I learned English when I was 8 years old. So it was at school, I studied in French, but at home in my neighborhood, I had friends who spoke English. So I was 8 years old and I was able to just learn from the people around me pretty fast. But my mom, who also was learning English at the same time, she was an adult. She was an adult at the time, so she till this day cannot speak English as fluently as I can. Okay? So the age of the person matters a lot. Okay? And we also have pronunciation issues. Accents are looked down upon. So that's another thing with learning a foreign language, is other than your native language, already there's a confidence issue when you speak that language. And also, if you're put in a situation with other native speakers, you might feel more intimidated. So, and it's also looked down upon to have an accent, right? For example, so many times I go to the restaurant with my mom, and if she can't pronounce, she doesn't have that English pronunciation that's perfect, people are not just going to be smarter than that. And if I can say and just try to figure out what she's saying, native speakers expect you to speak like they do. They don't make the effort sometimes to understand you. So even sometimes if you learn the language and if you can write it properly, if you don't speak it properly, it's a whole different thing. So the pronunciation is another little area that I just don't like about speaking foreign languages. Accents matter to get accepted properly. Okay, so that's what I have for question number 2. Okay. If you have any questions or comments, make sure to leave them below. If I missed anything and you want to point out any mistakes that I've made, feel free. I'm more than open to criticism. Okay, moving on to question 3. We have language acquisition by children and teenagers. The following text is a transcription of a conversation between Oliver, age 3, years 4 months, and his mother. They are just leaving the house to go for a walk, while Oliver's grandmother stays at home with Ellie, his baby sister. Discuss ways in which Oliver and his mother are using language here. You should refer to specific details from the transcription relating your observations to ideas from your studies of language acquisition. Okay, so remember, I guess, in relation to language acquisition, it's the fact that Oliver is 3 years and 4 months. Okay, so essentially 3 years old if you round it down. All right, let's get started with the transcription, and then I'll go through the notes that I've made. Come on, open the door. Stands by the front door. Right. Do you want to say Tata to Ellie? Tata, Ellie. We'll come back for Ellie. Will we? Well, go and say Tata, Ellie, and Tata, Granny. Tata, Ellie, Tata, Granny. I'll come back for Ellie. Bye-bye. Bye. Okay, where are we going for our walk? How about to the golf course? What? Mom, I'm trying to say the golf course. The golf course, right. Up this way. Take my hand now. Yes, this. What a lovely day, isn't it? Whose house is that? Julie. That's right. And do you know who stays in that next house? No, Billy. He's my friend, is he? Is he? See, that boy. What boy? Do you remember? No, I don't. Yes, you remember, Mom. Can I? There's horsies live there. That's right. There's horsies that live there. How many horsies? No. You don't know? No. Can we? I'm gonna skip. The way starts skipping. Oliver, look. What? Look at the pretty flowers. Look at that one. Oh. Skip along the path. She skipped along the path. Mom, can we see the rabbits? Are there? Great. Climbs up onto a low wall. Don't climb up there, Oliver. Look, there's somebody there. See? There's a pussycat. Whew, it's so hard for me to read transcriptions that involve children. Just all over the place. Okay? So already commenting on the language, obviously Oliver is 3 years old. So already you know non-fluency, right? That's the first thing that should pop up in your head when you read a transcription that involves a child. So it's non-fluency. They're still learning language, okay? But here, let's take a look at more interesting and less basic comments. So here we have, do you want to say Tata to Ellie, right? So Tata for now is called a colloquialism, okay? So Tata for now is not really, it's not really an actual term that you would find it in a dictionary. It's more, I would say, I wouldn't say slang, but it is colloquialism. So it's an expression that is used in search of a certain region, and people of that region would know what it means, right? And the actual colloquialism is tata for now, and here tata is actually more specifically an initialism. Okay, so they're just abbreviating, cutting short tata. So you just say tata. Okay? And the fact that the mother is the one saying, okay, Oliver, go say, do you want to say tata? Go say tata, right? And here again, she says, oh, go say tata to Ellie and tata to Granny. So Oliver understands abstract expressions, okay? Because she could have, it's an abstract expression, tata for now, okay? And he also understands here, do you want to say? It's a suggestion. She says, do you want to say? But really she's telling him basically go say bye, right? So he understands suggestions, things that are implied, right? And abstract expressions, orders. So he clearly understands that, because if you tell if he's 3 years old, if you were to tell a 1-year-old, go say tata, the 1-year-old would just look at you and be like, you know, when you have really small babies and the mothers or the parents say, okay, wave bye, say bye, and the baby is just staring at you, not doing anything, because they actually don't understand what, say bye, they don't understand. They're too young. Well, in Oliver's case, he's 3 years old, so he already understands orders, suggestions, abstract expressions. Okay, so there's non-fluency, disfluency, in other words. There's reformulation, where we're just, I'll come back. Okay, he struggles with this one. There. See, there's a little struggle for Oliver. We're just, I'll come back. Okay, so there's reformulation there. There's also repetition here, which is a part of language acquisition. Children, especially when they're young, they watch what the parents do and they repeat what parents do and also say. So here, he already said tata, tata, right? He says bye-bye, and then the mom says bye, and he says bye again. So he's repeating, he's learning. It happens again here when the mom says, do you know who stays in the house? No, Billy. So she's teaching him that the friend, so he probably knows Billy's face but not the name. So she says Billy and he repeats Billy. So we have repetition there for the purpose of learning. Okay, and here the mom, where are we going for our walk? She's making conversation with her child and she's trying to make him build vocabulary. So that is a tactic that is used a lot by parents to make their children learn, is to ask them questions, not quiz them, right? You're not quizzing them, but you're just trying to make conversation to get them to use their words and to speak and express themselves properly. Okay, and in this case, Oliver made a mistake and he says, let's go to golf course. All right, so the pronunciation is off there because he actually means golf, but golf and goff, they're homophones, so they sound very similar to one another, and that's a mistake that toddlers often make, is they can mix up homophones. So golf and golf, or usually a clear example is when toddlers make that mistake when they meet people. So often you'll have them meet someone and they can't pronounce the name properly. Okay, so homophones, yeah. And of course, another aspect of language acquisition is, again, he says, I'm trying to say golf course. Okay, so the mom understands eventually, okay, he means golf. So she could have just said, oh, okay, cool. She could have said, right, up this way, take my hand, right? She could have just not said this and just said that. But language acquisition, again, she has to correct the pronunciation and she has to let him know how to pronounce the right way. So she says, the golf course, right, up this way, take my hand now, right? So she corrects and shows him the right way to pronounce the word. And then again, making conversation. What a lovely day, isn't it? And he says, he's back channeling. Okay. And here, so we have back channeling. And here again, just like the repetition, we see, oh, it was here. Sorry. Yeah, we have back channeling and we have the mom who has the same back channeling method, right? She says as well. So knowing that this is, Oliver is the child, he got this from his mom. So he hears his mom say probably all the time. So he himself, he learned how to say Okay? So in agreement. Right? And here again, same method here that is used over, why am I losing myself? 2 seconds. Yeah, right here. So what a lovely day, isn't it? Do you know who stays in the next house? And where are we going on our walk? So again, making conversation. Okay, so it's the same thing. And here, what's next? We have virtuous errors that he's making when Oliver says, he says, there's horses live here. Right? Sorry. There's horses live here. There are horses that live here. So virtuous errors, he's still getting mixed up with his how to use verbs. Okay. And so that's the virtuous error. But then also you have hypernyms and hyponyms. Okay, hypernyms is he's learning about, we can see that in his vocabulary, he knows what animals are. Okay, so it's a category of things, right? So you have cars, you have animals, you have fruits, you have vegetables. Those are all hypernyms. And then hyponyms are categories, so children of whichever broader category. So a horsey, so a horse, a cat, a dog, those are hyponyms of the hypernym animal. Okay, so it's kind of like a tree diagram. So here we can see that by himself, Oliver says, oh, I can see there's horses live there. Well, live here, sorry. So he's aware of animals and even more specifically, different types of animals. So hyponyms. And later on, we also see when his mom says, oh, look, there's a pussycat. Okay, so again, she's pointing out a cat to him for him to learn that that thing over there is a cat. So another hyponym, right, that he's learning, or that he already knows, but she's just reiterating things for it to be really set in stone in his brain. And here, when he says horses live here, right, the mother says, yes, there's horses that live there. So she's correcting him again. And then she says, how many horses? So she's following up on his statement. She's adding on. So she's pushing him to learn, to go further, right? So yeah, good. You recognize that there are horses. Now, how many of them are there? Okay, so again, encouraging him to learn and expand as far as language. And he doesn't know. And here, getting Oliver's attention, she says, Oliver, look at the pretty flowers. Hypernym flowers, right? Look at the pretty flowers. Look at that one. So Now he knows that, here, look at that one, she's clearly pointing. So Oliver knows that this thing that she's pointing at is a flower. So again, language acquisition. It's a method that his mother is using to make him learn his hypernyms and hyponyms. Okay, and then we also have Oliver commenting on what he's doing. You know, he's saying skip, skip, skip along the path. So he's acknowledging the fact that he's skipping. Okay, and again, another hyponym. Can we see the rabbits are there? Okay, so he really knows his animals, it seems like. And the mom, we have some back channel agreement. She says and then he climbs onto the wall, and that's when she says don't climb. Look, getting his attention again. There's a pussycat. Okay, so here, those are the notes that I have regarding language acquisition, as well as the actual language that is used. Okay, and again, just like for question 1, for this one I plan the next paper 4 that I do, I'll actually write down the answer that I would, my final answer that I would submit for this exam. What was I going to say? I also wanted to mention that as far as the answers go, someone did ask me the question, and I believe that it's very important to make sure that your answer is as concise as possible, because you don't just want to blabber. Okay, the shorter your answer is and the fuller, it's short but full, so make sure that everything, all the important stuff are included. Then you could get a really good mark despite it being short, right? So that for me, the shorter the better. And yes, so this leads us to the end of this video. Okay, again, if I miss anything or if you have any comments, questions, please let me know in the comment section. But this is what I have for today's analysis of paper 4, A-level, May-June 2020, variant 4-2. Okay, thank you for making it to the end of the video, and I do hope that you enjoy the rest of your day or your night, depending on where you are located in the world.